Good morning. It's so good to see you come out in the rain, and it's so good to be getting this rain. So unusual for us, but wonderful. Oh, it's going to make the crops grow. And smiles on everybody's faces, hopefully. I am Linda Brody. I'm the president of Caprock Writers and Illustrators this year. So, we're so happy to have Brian Fostor here, and he is going to be talking in a minute, give us a good talk about homicide. On the announcements, they're very short. The Arts Festival was really nice. I think everybody had a good time there and sold books and stuff. I'm sorry I couldn't be there, but I was with you in spirit. For the Lubbock Book Festival in November, the sign-ups have already closed. For some reason, she closed the 1st of May, and I'm sorry that I fell down on that job and let you know. It's going to be at the Cotton Hotel, at the Cotton, I don't know. And that's in November. The board,
it's called the Cotton Board,
has been forward on the book, and we're going to use something called Job Form. It's a program where you upload your recipes and your pictures and all in one thing, which will make it easier at the end to collect them all, sort them all, put them in a book. So I was hoping we'd have information today, but Rosalind can't be here. She had another engagement. KJ, put something in the newsletter. She'll put something in the newsletter about it and about the site of what you need to do. She'll get all the information. We're still working on the 501c3. We really need this done, and there's been a few holdups, so I mean, a lot of wrinkles, so we're trying to get those worked through. I'm happy that Christina could be here today. Do you want to say something?
Everybody turned and looked at me. So,
Onto the mic so the video can hear you.
really?
Yeah.
Seriously? You want me on video? That's terrible that you want me on video. Okay, so the wonderful state of Texas, on their form for articles of incorporation for an organization, well, what they did, they actually changed the form at the end of the year and made that actually an active form in February. And so when that happened, when I submitted the form for us, I used the old form and they kicked it back. And so that's one of the holdups. And it's just like, seriously, it just, yeah. So it's been resubmitted online, so hopefully you will hear something in at least about a week or two. Hopefully.
Thank you, Christina. Okay, we'll have lunch afterward. Alan go to back to Caprock
We're gonna go.
Cafe today
Yes,
Okay, that's what she says.
because the other place
I'm on the road.
is full.
Okay, we're already on the wait list.
Okay, okay. So, can I see a show of hands of people that want to come to lunch? That's wonderful people.
Yeah, I signed up for 14, so we got plenty of room. So if you change your mind, come on anyway.
Okay. The raffle is back there at the back. We have a lot of wonderful prizes to be won. There's a small, mini cutting block that looks gorgeous. A dozen of fresh eggs. And I know those will be great. And there's lots of books and just fun stuff. So the tickets are $1 each, or buy for $3, or 10 for $7.50. Or so.
Wait a minute.
We have forgotten.
I'll give you a few more tickets. We'll figure it out.
Anyway, lots of fun prizes back there if you want to enter the raffle.
We have $65
Wow.
today. $65 so far today.
Oh, good, good. The author spotlight today is Keith West, and I'm looking forward to hearing him because I don't know that much about him since I'm fairly new to the organization. So I'm going to turn it over to Keith, and then after that, Brian Fostor will give us a wonderful program. Woo!
I'm going to put my clock up here because Matt is coming out front over 10 minutes. My name is Keith West. My day job is at Texas Tech, which has been fun this week. Final exams were given and grades were put in. I write science fiction, fantasy, mystery, or often at the same time. I do not try to necessarily restrict myself to a particular genre. I mostly have been writing short fiction. I've got a few novels in progress, and I've got 3 collections and several shorter pieces that have been published. I have 2 collections and a novella that I need to try to get published. They're just about ready to go. I ran into an issue with my laptop, and when I took it in for service, it was not connected to Wi-Fi at all, and they had to wipe and reload the operating system, so I haven't reloaded my software. I've got all the files and such backed up on the cloud, but I haven't reloaded the rest of the software yet. It's been kind of hectic. My wife entered the prison system about a month ago, as an employee, not as an inmate. But she's not living here locally, so I've been on the road a lot and such. I try to write as often as I can, which unfortunately has not been as frequently as it needs to be in the last couple of months. Something about putting a keyboard up on the steering wheel just doesn't work very well. But like I said, I've been doing some traveling and helping her get situated and such, and we'll be following her at the end of the summer, more or less maybe. There are some discussions about possibly staying at Tech in a semi-remote capacity that need to be had the details ironed out. Do you have any questions for me? DK.
Tell them about the series of short stories you wrote during Anna.
The Christmas ones?
Well, is that, I thought you did several different.
I've done several different things. We had a Christmas short competition 2 or 3 years ago. I don't remember the exact date. I was doing NaNoWriMo at the time, and I decided just to take a break and fiddle around and write things I didn't normally write. And I ended up writing 12 Christmas stories in a variety of genres. There was a slice of life, there was a satire, there was a Christmas ghost story, which actually placed second in the contest. KJ said it made her cry, so mission accomplished. And then I did the rules to the point of breaking, because I wrote a 2,000-word story where I changed the viewpoint character every 500 words so that I didn't exceed the 500-word limit. And I did something different. The first 3 stories would be romance, but there was a slight discrepancy between the end of part 1 and the beginning of part 2. And the 4th story resolved the discrepancy and made the whole thing dark fantasy. That's going to be in one of the collections that I'm putting together of Christmas stories. Were those the ones you had in mind? Okay.
And tell about the course that you were taking.
Which one?
Well, the one that was during the end of Ramadan. Well, I know.
No, I wasn't doing that during. Oh, last year I was.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know what WMG publishing is. I know you do, Isaiah, because you're taking a class right now. Is that right? Or finished the depth. Let's talk about that at lunch.
Okay.
WMG Publishing is run by Dean Wesley Smith and Kristen Catherine Rush, and they have online writing workshops. And I'm taking a couple of those right now. In fact, I'm taking one on writing cold case mysteries, and I'm already told our speaker I want to speak to him at lunch, because I have an assignment due tomorrow night. He'd be perfect to give me the information I need. It's about what is your local police station or a police station in Large City, how do they handle cold cases is the assignment. So I'm taking that one. That one was a Kickstarter exclusive. You only have access to that one if you pledge to Kickstarter, which I've been pledging their Kickstarters to get access to these exclusive courses because they're very specific and topical. But I've been taking those for about not quite a year and a half, and have learned a whole lot. I think the writing's improved some of that. So, yeah.
Dean Wesley Smith is.
Dean Wesley Smith has been writing steadily publishing since the 80s. He is the editor of the Writers of the Future anthology. He wrote a lot of Star Trek back in the 90s. He was one of the go-to people when a big-name writer couldn't meet a deadline to come in and ghost a book. He was the editor of the original Pulp House back in the late 80s, early 90s, and they revived that. Pulp House is a general fiction, short fiction magazine. He also publishes his own monthly fiction magazine with novels, short stories, articles, and such. He's very prolific, and he's been around. He knows a lot of the editors, a lot of the pros. Is friends with many of them, and has a lot of wisdom to impart. And he's been blogging without interruption for over 10 years, daily. Sometimes it's just, hey, we're running a Kickstarter. Sometimes it's more detailed stuff, and I follow him very, very closely. Any other questions? Yeah. What have I published? I have a collection of private eye stories set in Texas. I have a collection of time travel stories, and I have a collection of ghost stories. And 3 of those were actually collection classes that WMG ran, where at the end of the class you've got a collection. In weeks 2 through 6, you write a short story a week, and that goes into your collection. I've published some short fiction just standalone. I've had some stories published in some anthologies, some of which are still available, some have gone out of print. And I'm working on a science fiction story right now, because it was an assignment for a workshop that I knew I wasn't going to make the deadline, but I'm not going to stop the story because I'm having fun with it. So. Yes, sir?
Who are your influences? Who do you like to write?
I was told I only had 10 minutes, and I've used most of it. I started reading Ray Bradbury in about 5th grade. Bradbury led me to Henry Kuttner, who is probably my favorite. Charles Beaumont was a protege of Ray Bradbury. C.L. Moore was Cutler's wife. She created a character called Jarell of Joyeri, I think I'm mispronouncing that, in Weird Tales in the 1930s. This character was the first, probably female sword and sorcery protagonist. Robert E. Howard is a huge favorite. Jack Williamson. There are a lot of them. I read a lot of the classic science fiction growing up when I was a kid because it passed muster with my father, who would monitor my reading occasionally for age-appropriate content. Mysteries, I like, of course, Dashiell Hammett. Cornell Woolrich is fantastic. Raymond Chandler. Lauren E. Eskelman. I've just recently been introduced to Nick Heron, Slow Horses. I had to read it for a workshop a few months ago, and that was an amazing book. He's a writer I'm going to be studying. I mean, the answer to the question is going to vary depending on who I think of off the top of my head, but I do read quite a bit, or I try to. I haven't gotten a lot of reading done in the last couple of years, just with work and pandemic, and my wife and us moving. 1 minute, or is that a question?
Oh,
I was holding this finger button. It's not a traffic finger, so.
Where can we find your work?
Amazon. I've gone through draft to digital. I'm not on Kobo yet, but you can look up my name on Amazon. Texas No Shoes is the detective collection. Redeeming the Time is the time travel collection. And I'm drawing a blank on the ghost story collection because I changed the title a couple of times. But you can link to me there. And there are also some short stories that have not been collected, or at least not yet, that are posted on Amazon. I will say I've known Jerry for longer than, I was very impressed because I met him at an Armadillo Con back in the early 2000s, and when I ran into him at World Fantasy in San Antonio a few years ago, he actually remembered me. So,
He's a memorable guy.
yeah, I'm not sure if that was a good thing or not, but anyway, I do want to thank DK for asking me to be the featured author this month. It is an honor, and I'm going to turn it over now to our speaker.
thank you. I love that. If anybody wants to come and talk about their books or their projects, or just speak up and let me know, or DK back there. My email address is on the newsletters. How you get those. So I'm going to turn everything over to KJ right now to introduce our speaker who came so far. I love it. Okay.
The record, she's not turning everything over to me, just the introduction. We're very excited to welcome Brian Fostor today to Caprock. Brian spent 34 years in the Houston Police Department, with 30 years in the Detective Bureau, a good portion of the Homicide Division. During that time, he collected strange confessions and offense reports covering over 600 murders over his career. He's published 6 books and is working on his 7th in the Texas True Crime book series, including Evil and Then Some, More Homicidal Humor, There Were Graveyard Dead, and Blood Trails Across Texas. Please help me welcome Brian Fostor.
I'll try not to be too dark. My wife says sometimes I scare normal people.
We're not normal.
My early childhood was in Eritrea, which is now a country. It used to be a state in Ethiopia. Anyway, bounced around and wound up in Texas, and I've been here since. So it worked out, and like I said, picked up odd things. My wife said much of Africa obviously is caused me to be who I am. I don't know what that quite means. But anyway, murder squad for 24 years. That was 28 to 38 murders a year. And most of them were cut and dried, pun intended. There's always some, and when you think you've seen it all, you'll wind up with one and go, how could anybody do that? And there's some strange folk out there, and it's, but the covering of homicide in your writing covers a whole lot of things, and I don't care what it is, whether it's a cozy mystery or a serial killer. I've worked 4 serial killers that I know of. And a good, intelligent psychopath is a scary thing. You don't want to start. It's, I think there's a whole lot more serial killers than most people ever realize. And it's like Houston is boggy and a lot of open ground. Periodically, if we found pink paper, I don't live there anymore, I think those little small papers. I was in it in 5 years originally, and 34 later I retired. I went to work for home. But I think there's a whole lot more bodies out there.
So could you speak up a little bit more? It's hard to hear.
I'm not only called in and I'm deaf, can somebody tell me what you just said?
Get closer to the microphone.
Turn it up.
Oh, you.
Turn it up. Okay, here we go. But yeah, there's going to be a whole lot more serial killers out there. Can you hear me now? There's a whole lot more than we realize, I'm sure. And once you get somebody who's been in the system and has figured out to keep his mouth shut, I had an overdrawn attorney friend who I heard him chewing out a client in the hallway at the courthouse one day, and Roy was yelling at him, a bastard would get caught if he kept his mouth shut. And there's a lot of truth to that. People brag, and the other part of it is there is no honor among thieves. When one gets caught short, he wants to flip somebody and play let's make a deal. And a lot of cold cases get cleared that way. And there was a case that involved friends of mine who worked the investigation. And I had friends that, there's 2 sisters that were killed. And friends that were friends of theirs that had grown up with them. And another friend who also worked on that case was teaching at an Abilene Christian now. And I ran into him and I told him, hey, you got a career case? And he said, yeah, it's coming to trial 25 years later. Crook got caught short. He wanted to lighten his deal because he was up in Indiana for a career criminal charge. And he didn't want a life sentence. So he flipped the killer, who wound up pleading because they had him dead with wax on. It works, but that's one of those things. It worked, like I say, 4 of them. First one started out as a serial rapist, and crooks moved from one position to another. I realize this is heavy-duty stuff, but if you're looking at the right, think about it. Peeping Toms become rapists. It happens. That's the way they start out many times. And this guy was a rapist in Arkansas. He was tried. The second trial, the hung jury, had a hung jury on both of them. The DA's office didn't want to spend the time on the money, and that does happen. And they said, told him, if you leave the state, we'll drop the charges. He came to Houston. He started killing. Like I said, we were able to wrap him up. There were multiple cases ahead of him. It does happen. Eugene Roxton I worked on. He was good for 6 killings in the 6 months he was out of prison. He dropped the first time on, did 15 years, wound up shooting a Pasadena officer in the leg, and high-speed chase got caught. And Roxton was one of the the serial killers I've worked, none of them really fit the FBI's mold. The FBI and academicians tell you serial killers are white males, 28 to 38 years old. Two of the guys that work with black males, one of them was a gay male who would pick up men in bars and go home with them. They expected to play escape convict and the warden's wife, and he wound up monogramming them. Carl Watts, who was also known as Coral Watts, was a serial killer in Houston. He had done time in other states. He was violent. Women were really attacked. He was arrested. He was a predator. He was literally hunted on Saturday nights and Sunday mornings. He worked about 40 or 50 miles out of Houston to drive in. He liked following drunk drivers, females. He could make scenes look like they were not homicides, but accidents or suicides. He was not exceptionally bright, but he'd been in the system. He won't wear a hoodie where he didn't lose any hair. He wore latex gloves. The tennis shoes he wore after a killing, he would throw away because he didn't want the tracks to cover him. He was, and the one he got arrested on, a woman comes in from clubbing. He follows her in the door, shoves her in there. He liked to choke women out. That was a big deal. He wound up binding her hands and put her in a tub and was moving to drown her when in comes a roommate. Well, he grabs the roommate and starts choking her down, pounds fire on her, drags her in the bedroom and binds her hands behind her back, throws her on the bed. He goes back to drown out. Well, the one in the bedroom had collapsed, acting like she was unconscious, but she wasn't. He left the room, she jumped up, she went to the second story balcony, she winds up opening the door, screaming and yelling and jumping off the balcony. Guys came over and then ran upstairs. The roommate was underwater, pulled her out. Guy had been a lifeguard, so he knew what to do. Press on her, water came out, CPR, and she came alive. Roxton ran around the corner, hid behind a dumpster, and was arrested. Actually, he got flipped by his attorney. His attorney came and said, hey, you got him on attempted murder, you got him on this and that. He'll plead to life. And he'll point out eight murder cases in Houston. Several of those, and he said, otherwise, you've got an attempted murder. And they gave him a life sentence, and it worked out. And I was in the car with him one day. He was pointing out locations where he'd done cases. And he, like I said, sorry folks if I'm really dark about this sort of thing, my wife, but we met working a murder case, so she understands. She worked frauds and homicides and suicides all over the country. And there was a case involving dirty cops that had been fired from a couple other agencies. And I told her right up front that I wouldn't trust either one of these, and I wouldn't have a witness with me anytime I talked to them. And if you see them on your doorstep at your hotel, be ready to gut shoot. You know, that's just the way they are. And it took 5 years to make the case law. But she and I sat there with a 2-year-old between us when it came to trial. She worked it. But anyway, like I say, Carl Watts would point out locations. I was riding, Coral and Carl is two different names used. And they asked me, I wasn't involved in it, other than, hey, you want to ride along with us? Because we were in between two cops in the back seat. And we're in the car. We're stopped at a red light over off Allen Parkway, and this woman rides up on a 10-speed bicycle. And Watts looks over and he goes, looks at me and he says, she's evil. If I wasn't with you, I'd follow her. One case that he pointed out in the apartment, woman had been clubbing, followed the drunk driver to her apartment complex, followed her through the complex and shoved her in a pool, held her under, she drowned. It was written off as an accidental death. There was a jockey at Rice University, cold weather, had on a muffler, long scarf. He follows her, he strangles her, then he strangles her with a muffler and hangs her in a tree. She was written off of the ME's office as being a suicide. It happens. And there was a case in Missouri City that the city of Houston, in its infinite wisdom, annexes into adjoining counties. We run into other county DAs and people that don't want to deal with Houston trash, call them district attorneys in other counties. And so they tried the case in it. He killed his whole family. He was a ne'er-do-well dirtbag son. Everybody else in the family worked 2 jobs. One of the kids was a security guard going to college. The sister was going to college. Dad worked 2 jobs. And when he got kicked out of another junior college, Daddy told him, we're breaking your plate, you're on your own. Well, he killed the whole family. And when we got there, looked at the scene and said, everybody else is killed, shot, stabbed, something. But Daddy is shot. He's beaten in the head with a piece of cordwood from the fireplace and set on fire. It's a lot of overkill here, and this much overkill is typical of a homosexual male killing. The homosexual males, when they come unwound, the amazing Ginsu knife that was full automatic. They're like knives. I mean, you walk into the scene, you know what you're looking at. But really useless. And you got every paradetective got on my shift, and there were 14 people on. I worked second shift, 4 to midnight, because there wasn't a lot of brass there. And as long as you took care of your cases, they didn't care. And I didn't live in Houston. I commuted in, and I was always going against traffic. So it worked for me. The rest of the world wanted to work day shift, so that's your business. I did. But that Missouri City case, it was the son that was found everybody had blood on him. Well, that's no big deal. But the blood spatter interpretation told a different story. The cordwood, when it smacked Daddy and came back, left a pattern on the back of his shirt that was particularly cast off blood, cast on the front. And we had a couple of guys that were pros at that and worked with Tom Neville, that was a detective that literally worked with blood spatter interpretation with regard to how it works and developed a whole school on it. And they worked with Tom heavily. And they testified to it, but the jury didn't believe it. They didn't believe the detectives. And he wound up skating on killing his family. So Eugene Broxton, he just hated me. And he killed people. Eugene, when we arrested him at the truck stop out at off I-10 East with the county detectives. They had an informant that knew him and said, hey, this is where he is. We know you've got a warrant. We're going to pick him up. You want to come along? Great. And we did. And it was unfortunately the county detective goes, he's ours. We're taking him and talking to him. And Roxton had been in the system, and he's, Simon Pure and speak no evil, don't leave me alone, cop him an attorney. He wound up getting convicted and getting the death penalty, which was fine with us. But it was on their case because he would beat on the door of a motel and they'd say, who is it? And he'd say, security guard, and open the door. And he shot the husband in the face and then shot the wife and killed her in bed. Didn't kill the husband. He lost an eye in the deal, but he could identify him well and say, yeah, that's the one that killed his wife. And so we were able to, but he was the poster child for the outfit that Amnesty International. They thought he was wonderful. They came from other countries to visit him, and he smiled and put his hand through the glass and that routine. And he wrote poetry while he was in prison. And his story of how he was so abused by the police department. So good. He got his just rewards, and it's expensive to kill somebody, to give them the death penalty. 15 years ago, it was $12 million from start to finish. And that's basically because of the legislation. Legislators in Texas are lawyers, and they're feathering their own nest. Picking a jury in Texas at the board diary, and each individual potential juror is interviewed. And they go into all manner of things. And it takes 2 or 3 weeks, and they're making money off from the county when they're doing it. I knew a prosecutor that had been a prosecutor in Florida, and he said, Florida, we pick a capital jury in the morning, and we start after lunch on the trial. And he said, the conviction rate's the same. So it's, it's not like you're out there picking bloodthirsty rednecks out of the group. But like I say, the serial killers are what everybody wants to write about. And there's probably a whole lot more out there. A lot of times they wind up getting picked up because they're looking for a friend. They're wanting to bring somebody along to go play games with them. And it's the case. I mean, and that somebody will want to get a break in the line.
What's the difference between a sociopath and a serial killer?
Sociopath and a psychopath difference, there are 2 of them, and there are traits that one has that'll get over to the other side. There's something wrong with that animal, and I mean, we are animals, human beings. Pit bulldogs are animals, but they're breeding, there's something wrong with their brain. My grandfather's day, pit bulls were used to catch dogs, for bad cattle, or for hogs we were catching. But if they growled at a human, they killed them. They would not have one that was violent. And now we've got idiots that want to fight them and encourage them and breed to nothing but violent dogs, and it happens. The difference in them, you never know. And it doesn't make a whole lot of difference one way or the other. There's a few things about crooks that are true. They're going to lie to you. That's a given. You have somebody that'll confess to doing some horrendous things, but he's going to lie about something else that may just be unimportant to your case. Why? I don't know. They may have went up to drinking blood and killing nuns, but something odd there. He doesn't have a driver's license. Oh yeah, I wasn't driving. It's so important. I'm still going. Hopefully this is interesting, some good to do for y'all. there was one guy that, and this killer was specific to Hispanic girls, young. That was his deal. He would sexually abuse them, and then he would kill them by way of putting it's called 550 cord or parachute cord, and he had a toggle on there that he drilled a hole in a piece of wood, and he would spin it and tighten up the cord, and he would bring them in and out of consciousness. And then when he was tired of playing his games with them, he'd tighten it up and stick it under the edge. And that's the guys come to me and said, I used to shoot horses, and they said, well, this is a twitch he's using. And so we called the FBI and said, no, that's a twitch. And I said, well, they looked at the pictures, and it wasn't a twitch to hook up on a lip of a horse that's giving you trouble. And you'll stand still. It's one of those things like, if somebody grabs your upper lip with a pair of vice grips, you stand still too. But better to do that than have one kick you. That guy, we had DNA on, but wasn't in the data bank. He wound up falling on a charge of abusing his stepdaughters, and he had to become a registered sex offender because of that conviction. As a registered sex offender, his DNA was in the file. They came back on a cold case, ran bingo, there it was, and showed up hiring from Houston Homicide while he's sitting in prison. He goes, I wondered how long did it take? And that was him. We knew that he used a white van, or thought he did, because several people said he'd seen him on cruising for the same neighborhood. But that's all we have. He had been in trouble, and he knew how to keep his mouth shut. As writers, you can appreciate, I've got a friend that's the craziest man I've ever known. His name is Wesley. And Wesley, that got me killed in New Mexico one time. He said crazy, but that's another story. Wesley has more relatives that are strange than anybody I've ever known. And Wesley started writing a while back. It was great, but his wife would pick it to pieces. She's an attorney. No, this is wrong, you're doing this wrong, and he basically quit. And Wesley's very frank about things to people, and he and his wife would live apart for a year at a time for a while. And when he told me, he goes, this, that, and the other, and having problems with her doing this. I told him, I said, Wesley, Richard Pryor was talking about somebody one time being in love with a bitch he couldn't stand. And he thought that was the funniest thing he ever heard in his life, so he told her about it, and she doesn't like me anymore. That's just any homicide situation, you deal with medical examiners. I had a partner that loved to go to autopsies. Deal with Frank. Frank had been an Army, trained as an Army sniper, and terminal ballistic was really of interest to him. And he would show up at most every autopsy, every morning. And it's good, bad, and different than medical examiners. That's what you deal with. And some of them are criminals. Tell you a story of
What does that mean if they're criminals? Does it mean they're hiding stuff?
I cannot hear you.
Oh, I say, what does it mean if they're criminals as a medical examiner? Does it mean they're hiding something, or they're...
Okay, Dr. Himchak, who had the Houston, was very renowned. Himchak, for organ transplants, charged $2,000 for every time an organ was taken out of the body for transplant. And he would send one of his medical examiners, one of his doctors, and all of them for an extraction to view the taking of the organs. And that way, because he said otherwise, the cause of death was it like removing the organs. It took his lungs and heart. And he had to be taken before a grand jury to get his act straightened out. And he stopped that routine. I had some cases that wrong. And a friend of mine named Johnny Bond says, cold justice, I think, is something that he's on. Johnny had a case. Markham Duff Smith was the name of the man who started the death situation. Duff Smith had a best friend named Walter Walthauser. They hired Walthauser, was wanted to get into business of bail bonding, so he had worked with the bail bonds, but Markham wanted to hire a killer. So Walthauser called us the bail bonds and said, "Do you know anybody that do a contract company?" The guy that said, "Anybody know a killer that wants to hire her out?" The guy there said, "Oh." And he wound up doing the homicide. The first one. He goes in, name's Alan Janeka, was the contract company. Janeka goes in and strangles Markham's mother. He was supposed to go in and kill the mother and her husband, who had no heirs, and lived in a mansion in River Oaks, in Houston. River Oaks, a $100 neighborhood. The husband's out of town on business, so he just takes mom out. He winds up with a pair of pantyhose and strings. Has her in the bathtub. Well, the MCheck rules this to be an autoerotic death. The only female autoerotic that's ever been found in Texas, or out of Texas, in America. Gets better. Markham and Walthauser are buddies, and they're trying one thing or another, and they don't make a whole lot of money. And he goes through mama's money that he inherits, but he had to share it with his sister. His sister's married to a guy. Markham decides to start selling insurance. And he sells a brother-in-law a $150,000 policy. Guess who picks up the deal on the end of it? Markham has got his name on the policy too. Well, they live in a nice neighborhood, and brother-in-law's makes a pretty decent living. And brother-in-law doesn't show up to work. And people at work say that's unusual, so they came by and beat on the door, his car's in the driveway, the wife's car's in the driveway, nothing. So they ask the neighbors, and they call the police, and they force entry into the house. Brother-in-law's dead in a recliner in the front room. Wife's dead over the in the den. Their year-old son is dead in the crib. All of them shot. There's no gun in the house. And the son, the brother-in-law, doesn't like guns. Well, the MCheck calls a buddy of his. The MCheck studied the priesthood, and he brings in a defrocked priest. They come in. He's got a PhD in psychology, and he writes up a report. And it says, oh yeah, well, it's postpartum depression on her part. And so she shot her husband and went and killed the kid and killed herself, and somebody obviously came in and didn't want to make it look like she killed herself and done anybody else in, so they picked a pistol. And the guys working the case go nuts, and they scream, yell, and kick things, and it doesn't go anywhere. Well, actually, the ME's office made it a double homicide suicide. So it goes nowhere. Well, about a year and a half later, phone call comes, the magic phone call comes in. A lot of homicide cases are cleared by the magic phone call. And this woman calls out of Mississippi and says her boyfriend has left her with a pistol that he wants her to hang on to, and everybody's name that was involved in this case, where these three people were killed in Houston, a baby and a husband and wife. And everybody knows about Johnny going nuts in this case. And I'm saying great things about the mother of every medical examiner involved. And so they wound up going to Mississippi. Well, actually, talking to the woman, he said, "You looking at the pistol now?" She said, "Yeah." She said, "It's going to be a Colt single-action revolver Frontier Scout with a 22 Magnum cylinder on it. It's a convertible. It can either shoot 22 long rifle or 22 Magnum." And she said, "Yeah, it's written on the side of it. It says 22 Magnum." He says, "You're holding a murder weapon, killed 3 people, and we need to get it from you." So they go to Mississippi. Of course, they had trouble getting money from the police department. We got to fly to Mississippi to pick up a murder weapon. And, yeah, sure. But it wound up coming there, and you take a sworn statement that's sworn before a notary, and that way it gives it the validity that you need in Texas. In Louisiana, a statement from a witness is just on a piece of paper. I saw him do it, it's over with, here's your big cheap tablet. Things are different, and you go to foreign countries like Louisiana, things are different.
How much time had passed before the magic phone call came in?
One more time, please.
How much time had passed from the murder being closed out to when the magic phone call came in?
18 months.
Okay.
And the reason he had her holding that pistol was he didn't trust Walthauser, because Walthauser was, and Johnny Bonds was a good cop. He made a comment. He said, "That's the most intelligent crook I have ever seen." He said, "He's sharp." And Walthauser played, "Let's make a deal." He took a life sentence. The trigger man, Jeanette, he took the death penalty. He knew it was coming, but he was in prison when they interviewed him. And then the brother, Markham Duff Smith, he was pure as the driven snow. He didn't know what they were talking about. Yeah, he inherited all of his sister's belongings, her house, and her furnishings, but he knew nothing about that. And but Markham was too smart for his own good. There was a guy that he hired in prison to come in and lie for him. And the guy was a good liar, and there are people in prison that will tell stories for you. You'll find them, and he was out of prison at the time that murder took place. But he didn't have any use for baby killers. So Markham wrote all the details for him to put down there, and he called Johnny Bonds and said, "Here, Markham wrote this stuff out, this is what he wants me to testify to. And I don't like baby killers, and I don't care who comes after me." And then they were able to lift fingerprints off of that, of Markham Duff Smith off that paper. And he had a hard time. But going into that trial, the head check was not going to change the findings on the autopsies. He was going to leave. And the captain and 2 investigators met with him and told him, "Bull Creek, you got a big name in this packing up bodies for a living. You've been at it a long time, and you like to get on TV. We're going to get on TV. And we're going to tell them exactly what we've got, and that you want to clear these idiots that we've got in jail, and who 2 out of 3 have confessed to murder." Wow. And you have check changed the findings of the report, but the ego of medical examiners is equal to the ego of surgeons. And my wife's best friend was an ER nurse, and she said, surgeons tend to have a God complex, and they don't question. It's a big deal. Tis the season, tis the case, and anybody's here's a surgeon, sorry, but it's true. But yeah. That was, like I say, the only autoerotic female death was that one, ever. And I don't know if he changed that one or not, but he did on the 3 in that one scene. Now, in Texas, there are, let me see if I can find that information. It's rather interesting. There's only like 24 medical examiner's offices in Texas. Well, counties don't want to pay for autopsies because they're going to cost $3,000. So you've got to hold to a medical examiner that's got the time to do it. So the JP comes out there and he does it. He gets out there and he does his autopsy. Oh, I forgot to tell you that the Harris County and the Dallas County District ME's office does what they call a psychological autopsy, where they bring in a friend of theirs, a psychologist, and they go out and they talk about the case, and they give them the information, and that's how they rule. And there's a lot of people at the JP office. I mean, a lot of justices of the peace were on a John Deere tractor making a living before they became JP. And there was one that I dealt with because Houston, in his magnificence, took in a portion of Fort Bend County when I talked to the DA or the JP on a case, and he said, if they fall on their face, it's a coronary. If they're laying on their back and if they're found, it's a stroke. You know, so there it is. And so, and there's people that, as a toxicologist, I'm a friend of mine, and he was pretty renowned. And he made a comment, he said, there's a lot of cases of poisoning, he was sure, that were passed over because they were found. Now, during an autopsy, a lot of them, most of them, good morgues, have a strategy because there are some poisons that make certain organs have a specific color. But there's some poisons out there, including nicotine, that you can kill people with. And DMSO is a solvent. They used to take horses that had splints on their legs when they were young, when they were being worked, and they paint them with DMSO to try to get it down. But DMSO will hit your bloodstream as soon as you get it on your hands. You can taste garlic whenever you get it on you. And I've read, there was an ATF agent that I shot competition with, and he brought me an article on DMSO to kill people with. And it said that there was a white supremacist magazine, and he said they mixed black fat flag concentration with DMSO, put it in a syringe and squirt it on people's backs. Worked best in the hot weather. I think what you could do with arsenic.
No, so not in them, just on them.
You put it on them and it goes in them.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'm not a chemist or anything else, but I promise you, I've had DMSO on me before when I had splints in the horse's leg when I was stupid enough to keep horses. And that's what I used to lower it. Yeah, that's, but again, in the JP case, there was a guy that I worked with named Alan. And Alan moved up the ranks to being a lieutenant. And Alan was a goof. But Alan was a real goofy guy. And he got promoted to lieutenant the same day he got a 1-week suspension without pay. I mean, that's the kind of guy he was. Alan accidentally shot a crook in the leg and then refused to make a statement about it. Internal Affairs said an accidental discharge is an accidental discharge, but refusing to go along with policy is good for a pretty good loss in salary for that moment. Well, Alan was not going to change his opinion. things. No, he got suspended the same day he was promoted. And he screwed some other things up. And he had about 25 years on the department, and his wife, after his last suspension, told him, it's time for you to retire. And we need to move to Georgia where my family is. And if you don't, I'm going to divorce you and take your son with me. And so Alan was going back to work that first day, and his car was found on a bridge, and his ID was laying on the seat, and his wallet was laying in there. And Fort Bend County came out and they brought a dog who sniffed the car and tracked him. Went on down, parallel to the stream there. And then it stopped in the water. Well, Alan, being the goof he was, what he could finally had, what he had done is he walked downstream and then he walked into the water and walked upstream, where he shot himself in the head. And his platinum that he floated downstream. So his body would be found damaged, and it was a stream that was used for irrigation, like rice fields. So they would pump it up from the Brazos River, and downstream would go. Well, Sheriff's Department said, hey, the tracks are there in the mud, shut the irrigation program down. They did. You can see his tracks going upstream. They found the pistol, the same one he had the accidental discharge with, laying there in the mud with the glasses. Well, that's fine and good. It's a suicide. But Alan's wife, that day, goes down and hires a lawyer in town who's one of his brothers had been the governor in this state of Texas. And then things started moving. And my partner at that time and another officer, which I didn't understand, I lived out near there. And they didn't call me to go out there, they called these two guys that came in from Houston. They wound up going in there, and Alan said, Frank was telling my partner, said, hey, that's an obvious, straight up and down suicide. And they sent, because it was a dead body, from a gunshot wound, the JP sends it into the morgue in Harris County. The doctor who posted him said, we had specific orders from the JP. They did not want us to make a ruling that he was going to have one with a coroner's inquest, which JP's can't order. Coroner's inquest went on, and it was put on by the DA's office there in Fort Bend County. The Texas Ranger that was on scene, who was running for sheriff, and the JP was running for county judge, imagine. And they told my partner not to show up for the coroner's inquest. They didn't want him in the county. This Texas Ranger put on a very short thing that the body was found gunshot wound in the head, and that's all they had. They floated up, caught in some brush. And it was ruled a homicide. It was a double, it was a brand new insurance policy. Insurance policies in Texas are contestable in the first 2 years. So, and it had a double indemnity clause. It was a $150,000 policy that was worth $300,000 in a homicide. But on a suicide, it wouldn't have paid anyway. Funny how things work out. And of course, like I said, the investigator from Fort Bend County was not called to the coroner's inquest. Neither was the Houston officers that were on scene. And Texas Ranger went on to become county sheriff. So it all works out. Well, it's things happen. And it's just, you've got to take into consideration. So, but yeah, well, like I said, there's people that I'm sure there's a whole lot of cases out there. They just get ruled by JPs doing one thing or another. Now, you're looking for information to write about. Call, get on the internet and find the ME's offices in the state of Texas. The guys that work at ME's offices are working 12-hour shifts. Most of them 6A to 6P, or 6P to 6A. Call on the night shift. If you're getting tormented from an investigator, he may be a jerk and I want to talk to him. He may talk to you. You tell him, you've got a strange case that's really, or an investigator that's working on a case that's odd with an agency, you can tell me about it. There's, every agency's got one that wants to run off at the mouth or ingratiate itself, get his name, or tell him, I won't put your name in it. Tell them that up front. And the same investigator, tell them, I won't put your name in it. But you can, every investigator has got a career case. That's what I write. I don't write any kind of fiction. This is all true stuff, but I don't use people's right names. Similarly, don't use the street address or a phone number or a statement if you get one, because readers will go to that address and knock on the door. It's really kind of strange. But it is kind of strange the deal you do, this, for the folks you deal with and the people that read your stuff. But talking, and if they tell you, you know, to go away, call back 3 days later, because they normally work 3 on, 3 off, and you'll talk to another investigator. So you got a potential there, you know, to get it, and you can call on the day shift and talk to the chief investigator and see if there's a case there or somebody that he knows in one of the agencies that's worth talking to. And it may be a source that you're looking for. Now, if you really want something interesting, look at Mexico. Mexico has got more stuff going on, and people will tell you that Mexico is under the influence of the Middle East. When you try to look at, you know, people will look at you like you are completely insane. But the Iranians were in Mexico for 700 years. There's mosques all in still. 711, they took over Spain. And they were there for 700, literally until 1492. And they were driven, and the reason they were driven out of Europe is they were moving into France. And the Brits and the French got together and drove them out, literally, across the isthmus into North Africa. But you tell Mexicans that, they'll tell you you're insane. What you tell them from there is to say, okay, during the Alamo, Santa Ana had to play the Deguelo day and night. It's a throat cutter song. The Deguelo is a Persian cavalry song. And they'll look at you and with their mouth off, they can find that on the internet too. But the graft system in Mexico is the same that it is in Iran. Everybody gets a piece of the action on the web chain. Mexico was isolated, it has not changed. My family's been in Texas since it was Mexico. And I had family that was in Mexico. Their property was, some of them, Ruskies, and they were working the mines and running the mines there when they were naturally last in the dirt. So, it is the case, and there is so much stuff out there. In Mexico, judges don't ever do their whole shift, their whole time. They do half of it. And then a new judge comes in and he gets paid to give people literally outs from prison. It's a whole new ballgame. Dealing with Mexico police is interesting. Now, you get hit men who work in the States from Mexico. They come up, do the killing, and leave. And it used to be, we're talking in the 70s, you had a bad Mexican national that was causing problems. The locals here would hire a hitman from Mexico to come in and whack him. Well, he wanted to make sure that people that hired him knew he did a good job. So he would overdo the job. He might shoot him, he might chop him up with a machete or something. There was one that I saw a couple of cases of. He would drive a nail in their forehead and hang a squirt pin on that. It was this, it was neat, but it was the case. I mean, Mexican bodyguards are pretty good. I had some friends that I didn't realize it at the time. A friend of my father's, he was always asking me to come to Water Farm. Come out here, I was in high school and college, spend some summer, spend Christmas, vacation. Then I realized he wanted his son. When I got married, he sent a letter of condolence to my father. It couldn't work out. But he had bodyguards that were terribly, terribly professional. And they were all, well, it's like the Zetas in Mexico, the drug gang. They're all former paratroopers. And they just shifted, they just changed sides. And like anything else, greed is an amazing thing. Anyway, I've always gotten involved in Mexico and loved it. I was planning on one time while I retired down there, but no longer. It's the drug gangs have just destroyed the whole country, unfortunately. I worked some, shall we say, questionable death claims, when it always had the same rollover actions, the same stretch of road, the same highway police did the investigations. So I went down there and I did an order to the Minister of Seville to do an exhumation, and we done with a lot of empty boxes. Even though I talked to the priest and got him to the service because there's no involvement in Mexico. So that, and then the bodies started showing up. There's a lot of people that get killed in Mexico. And then I got, counseled by a couple of gentlemen. Mexico's funny. They always get confessions in their cases. They used to use Coca-Cola and strap you in a chair, pull your head back, and take short bottles of Coke, 6.5 ounces. They squirted up your nose until such time as you'd sign whatever they put Coke. But they use Topo Chico now because it's carbonated water and it doesn't get stick on them when they're doing it. It's an interesting country. But yeah, I was able to break a lot of cases on the death claims because I wasn't afraid to use a veterinary x-ray and dig up the bodies and shoot the pictures of them. It worked out pretty well. I guess I until such time as my brother was in South America at the time. He was on the State Department. I had his card in my pocket. I think that's the only reason I think being stuck in the mark somewhere. The contract killers, for the most part, are losers and junkies, or just bad news folks. Interestingly enough, about half of them, at least, lose half the money there. I'll give you 50% of them pro, do the job. I'll give him, does the job, he doesn't get paid. But the killer can't go to Red Persons Bureau or anything else. But I knew one guy, and I didn't realize he was known as Tommy Tish. And Tommy was a career criminal. He would run Tommy would run high-end prostitutes. Tommy would move a large load of dope. Tommy would break legs. He did a lot of work for bookies and for different operations and collections. You go and tell somebody you owe so-and-so, 10 grand, and they go take a hike. Tommy just break his leg. You do that because dead men don't pay bills. I mean, it's just part of it. I said, you like both arms? I'll come back to visions of that. And but most of it, and sometimes bookies will take more bets than they can cover because they don't want to admit that they're not a big player. And then they have to lay those bets off. They have to pay 10% to somebody else. And bookmaking operations, like in Dallas, that's mob. Houston is not. Houston is a freelancer. But there was some mob influence there. There was a guy that I knew. I didn't know he was in the mob. One by the name of Peter Kay. And Peter Kay was going to find out a mafia lieutenant. And they would lay off bets to Peter Kay because the outfit he worked for had enough money to cover. And they had to pay 10% up front or they wouldn't. So he was making money off that. I mean, like Super Bowl, that sort of thing, big basketball games. People want to drop pig bets. And they go to local bookies. Well, Tommy, I didn't know Tommy was as vicious an animal as he was. Tommy was known because he had a pornographically engraved .45 automatic that he loved dearly. And a friend of mine wound up with it because Tommy needed $3,500 one day real bad right now. And Gus had this pistol in it. I said, I'd heard about Tommy's pistol and photographic. And he said, yeah. I said, Gus, I'd like to write about Tommy's pistol. He laughed. He said, you gotta go talk to Tommy's gunsmith first. I said, man, I don't know Tommy's gunsmith. I said, yeah, you do. Go talk to so-and-so. Okay. I went over to his shop and I said, I want to talk to you about Tommy's .45. He laughed. He said, man, on 10 different occasions, Tommy brought that pistol into my shop and said, my pistol needs an overhaul. He said, I would change out the barrel, the firing pin, the extractor, the ejector, and he took the old parts with him every time. So I did that 10 times. And he said, and then he says, and that's not the only pistol I'm going to come and have. So he was a big dog killer. I didn't know it. I hit him with a grand jury subpoena one time. He didn't care for me a whole lot, but he showed up. But that's not the only grand jury he ever showed. They nailed Tommy in federal court. If you want to nail a crook, that's where you go. Everything that you could file in the state court, you could file in the state and the federal court. There was a U.S. Marshal that his daughter got a horse stolen in Waco. He got mad and he filed a horse theft on the guy in Waco. His attorney goes, why didn't you file in the state court? He said, because I don't want so-and-so in prison. And he didn't. The horse wound up being slaughtered, and that was when I have mixed feelings about horses too. I've loved them all my life, but there's no reason that crippled horses shouldn't wind up hanging and as meat. But it's my friend Flicka, and people get excited about that. That's and a horse that can't be used anymore really doesn't have anything but meat on the hoof. And again, I lived in France, and horse meat's more expensive than beef over there. But yeah, it's now I'm talking about atomic tish. I keep getting information recently. And I found out about Peter Kay. I'd seen Peter when I worked Vice in different clubs, but he worked up as far north from Houston as Madisonville, which we're talking 75 miles. And he covered the bookies all the way up there, all the way down into Galveston. He was a big operator, and Tommy was his collector. And pretty much all you had to do is have Tommy walk in the door and they'd pay up. Now, the South Americans, for the most part, that you wound up with, at least those in Houston I've dealt with, that do contract killings, for the most part are manual laborers. These are guys that will do a job, but it's for extra spending money. It's not, they're not going across the border back and forth. And with the gangs, the prison gangs, many times the Mexican outfits will sub stuff out to like Tango Blast people, which Tango Blast is different. It's not like the Mexican Mafia or anybody else. They can turn down jobs for one that somebody's looking for transport, somebody's looking for contract killings, from what I gathered. And most of them are Hispanic, but I think if you know a Hispanic, you may be eligible to get become a member of that. That's but friends of mine that have worked Tango Blast stuff and gang squads, so they're bad news, and unfortunately there's a lot of them.
Would you take just a minute and tell us about your writing craft? Like, your writing craft? Yeah. Did you start like with police reports, or?
I collected confessions and statements, and every time a street agent said something weird, I wrote it in the ledger book. And the ledger book had a friend with more money than sense, and he gave me a book, red letter book, with gold leaf on it, and everything I know about law enforcement by Brian Fostor. Opened up as blank pages. And so I started writing in that book every time I said something weird. And there was 38 wad is loaded even with the case. And it's just flat on it. It's a 148 grain bullet for the most part. And had a case that went out on, stopped by, it was a straight up suicide. And talking to the witness out there, he said, here's a guy who thinks he knows everything about guns, and he says, you can tell they're blanks because they're flat on the end and stuck it up against his head and pulled the trigger.
Wow.
So he got blown through ventilation like a 74 Chevrolet. Yeah, I know, I'm 3 degrees on this. But it's just, I never wrote that up, and I had enough of those like that, that it was in a chapter called Famous Last Words. And there's a lot of men that have gotten killed when they knock the fire out of their wives or girlfriends. The wife comes up with a gun, and they tell her she doesn't have the cojones to shoot them, and she proves them wrong. That's very, very common. And it used to be you had a lot of idiots that were shooting me idiots. Somebody would pull a gun on them, would you shoot me? And they wouldn't. But the number of shoot me's has gone down. I guess which is more common use.
Let me ask you, how did you, when you were working these cases, how did you stay sane and centered and honest?
Well, you have to look upon that cadaver as a piece of evidence. I've always had an interest in firearms and criminal ballistics. And so I'd go in and go to the scene of the crime scene unit, and then my partner would tell me, this is what the witnesses are saying. And I'd say, that's plausible. Or separate them and put them in cars and drive them downtown, they're lying. But that's, after a while, you get a hard shell. And the tough part is, I worked dead baby cases, a bunch of them, until such time as I became a parent. I was scared 40 when I decided to start being a parent. I'd been married once, and after about 20 minutes, and I was a gun shy, mister. And so that wasn't going to happen, and I had a horse and idiot dogs, and I got along with them just fine. And then wound up at that one murder scene where I wound up with my wife. The only woman I knew that I wanted to have a kid with. But when she met me, she said I was paranoid, and as paranoid as she was, so it probably worked out very well. But anyway, you have to. You got a case, I mean, you're working a case, and it may get overturned on appeal. And you're going to have to come back in 5 years or 10 years and go through it again. And I've gone back on a couple of them since I've retired. Because it comes up, and what do? You say, sorry, Charlie, to the family? No, can't do that. Now, I will tell you all something. I've just recently, there's been a couple of cases where people have been charged and convicted. One, Amber Geiger, Dallas PD, walked into the wrong apartment, thought she saw a murderer in her apartment and shot him. I believe her attorney didn't do right by her, did not talk to her and tell her to testify, how to testify. She testified. The DA asked her, did you intend to kill him when you shot him? And she was convicted because she said that. Actually, her attorney said, and you do. I was taught. I was taught by some other people. You shoot somebody, if you shoot them to stop them. They were coming at me, and I was scared, and I wanted to stop them. That's why I shot them. Jury hung her out to dry. Fort Worth officer shot a gal at her house. She put a gun through the window. He shot her. And the defense arrested. I've been involved in shootings. You don't think straight when you wind up in a shooting. I'm sorry. And what did he do? He went in the house and he picked up the gun right there and he didn't turn loose until the detective showed up. You hang on to stuff. I picked up some cartridge casings I was involved in shooting. I shouldn't have, but I did. I knew better. But your brain doesn't quite work. As they say, hair, teeth, and eyeballs are on concrete. And a lot of what I put into cases was because I've been there and I've seen some officers that were messed up. I had some guys, I took a statement from a woman one time, and they had a guy exposed himself to women in and the maintenance man, who was my father would have said about half right, stupid's out there showing off his favorite thing, and the maintenance man had a pump shot gun, runs out there and was trying to hold him. I've got a witness that doesn't know either one of them, but she sees the weenie waver grab the shotgun barrel, and it goes off, and his chitterlings are sprayed over the wall. And it's like I say, things happen. But the guys working the case tried to file charges on him. And my supplement kept him from doing it. Yes, sir.
Can you talk a little bit about the book, your most recent book, about the process of writing it, getting it published, and all that?
I'm self-published because I'm old enough to where I don't need to ship it off and get somebody to pay me $2,000 for a book or from XYZ Publishing House, and then take another 18 months to print it and put it out there. And from what I gather, you've got to push your own program out there, like an ugly sister you're trying to marry off, to do that. And so I figured I'd just try it myself, and I enjoy traveling around visiting folks. So it works. But I write short stories. I grew up loving short stories, Zane Grey stories, and some of it's come back and forth. A friend at San Antonio, it was one of his ancestors that was killed. The guy had been a Texas Ranger for a short period before when he was killed down there. It was right at probably about 105 years ago in the lower canyons, and there was a horse and mule thief that he had a warrant on. They arrested him one time at a lake, actually, and were bringing him out, and that ancestor was shot and wounded. Well, he definitely didn't appreciate that, so he decided to go back later on when he healed up and try to get him again. They did arrest him, but he went in to arrest him, and they were shot, two of them. One was a Treasury agent, the other was a Texas Ranger. They were shot and killed, and then stripped of clothes, and their faces smashed with rocks, and the other guys that were with them driven off. And everybody knew everybody in those days down there on the Rio Grande. There weren't that many people. Everybody I know down there speaks a mixture of what they call Spanglish. It's English and Spanish mixed up anyway. That's just part of it. Stories that need to be written. There's a story in the first book about a guy named Ronnie Beck. Ronnie Beck was big. He was a big scrappy country boy from Fordyce, Arkansas. And Ronnie got killed when he was 23 years old. He was the funniest cop I ever knew in my life. Periodically, Ronnie would just go off the rails. And moonlit nights in the gay and artsy correction part of Houston, Ronnie would pull on a Wolfman mask and hairy hand gloves around a patrol car ring. And he was just funny, good hard-working cop. Had a hit and run case. He was stopped on the freeway, and he got hit by a drunk driver and killed him. Like I said, he was 23 and married 23 days at that time. Had just been accepted to the Arkansas State Police and was going home. But I didn't write a story about Ronnie, nobody knew who he was. I mean, he worked a side job working security at a government housing project. He was all Hispanic. Ronnie would go in there, he said, all these young males were scruffy looking. So he went and got himself some barber shears and started giving free haircuts there in the security office. And I was there one day when he was yelling, this kid, come over here, Julio, why don't you look like your sister? And the kids were coming back later on saying, my mom said you need to leave it longer on top. And so I didn't give him another haircut. But when he died, funeral in Houston, here come the kids out of the party, and they're holding wildflowers. Cool stuff. So, like I said, Ronnie was a good guy. You don't write it down, it's gone. And there's some, like I say, I worked for a year in East Texas for a sheriff's department before I started there. But when Federico, Gomez Ferrasco decided we wanted to leave prison, I decided I would make a hearing of the money. Everything would get shot up like that. And so I went to Houston PD. Of course, I started with the first few years. My kid went down and talked to him and decided he didn't want to be part of Houston PD. And when he went to Fort Worth, they said, well, you filled your papers for your application in Houston. He said, yeah. He said, well, Dad went to work for Houston. He said it was a great very well. It said it wasn't much of a job when it left. And they said, you may work out, kid. He started calling it Fort Worth, and he left there and he's working for the sheriff's department. He's there. They said, when they come in the roll call and say, don't get out there and try to jack up drug dealers and one thing or another, just right around the way they do. That's against the state law. Don't do that. And of course, they didn't appreciate his comment. He must get his stuff from his mother's side of the family. Any other questions? Yeah, like I said, Ms. Mayor.
I was wondering if any of the serial killers you work with told you why they killed?
Their motivation, you can't pick up on it until maybe after.
Yeah.
And like I say, the one that was gay white male and said that he was raped in prison. He was small. He wasn't tiny. And feminine looking. He'd get picked up in gay clubs, go home, monitor him. And that was an interesting deal. Worked the scene, and there was a piece of paper that had a fingerprint and blood. We submitted it, nothing. About 3 days later, ID calls and they said, you put a fingerprint in here, and we didn't have it on the database, and the Avis machines were running through the automatic fingerprint. He said, but he just came through here and was picked up possession. Pulled him in and said, surprise, surprise, oh, wow, somebody stole your fingerprints. And no, he owned up to it. It's, the motivation, I'd say, we'll go through, like, Roxton just, he killed him and he just killed him. Only killed white people, to my knowledge, he was black, but he got along with people from Amnesty International real well, very well. Like I said, they read his poetry, and he talked about, I don't know whether or not that man on his web page, I was the evil white monkey cracker we were talking about or not.
I have a question. Do you write your books as novels about a case, or are they actual, you just change the names of the people, but they're actually cases? And how many cases in each book?
Just a few of them that I use the right names on. There was a friend of mine named John Hurd who was just recently died. John had been in the news business, and I was talking to him, and he said, I'd given him a copy of one of my books, and he said, there's some guys out of McAllister, Oklahoma, that walked out of the prison. He said it seemed like once a week they'd walk out of McAllister when he was with a newspaper or a TV station, that shirt. And he said, that was just, these guys killed people in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and then came back up in there. And the guy they killed the fellow who was the lieutenant that was in charge of the task force out of the Oklahoma State Police. And they shot lots of people and killed people up and down while they were at it. They were burglarized houses, or they killed people, steal what they wanted out of the house. And good Southern folks, we all got guns, so they wind up with good ammunition. They wound up getting killed up in Oklahoma when they went back. And when they wound up killing that fellow, they killed a ton of people. They were just vicious. They would, instead of running, they did a homicide, they'd go to a wooded area and go camp out. And they'd set up a dragnet around the area and go catch them. I use their right hands. For the most part, no, I don't use right hands at all. And I write short stories and I write novels. I don't feel much of it.
Do you read?
Oh,
Do
yeah.
you like to read?
Read a lot of them, James Lee Burke, who writes about, he has a series in there, Dave Robichaud, who was a Cajun detective, had been in New Orleans. Things got dicey in New Orleans, so he went elsewhere when he tried out, and went to the neighboring parish. Louisiana is different. I had a case one time. The Vietnamese were dead in the house. His car was missing. He ran a store in his apartment complex. People would buy candy, cook, beer, one thing and another, threw it open the window, they'd knock on it. Well, he winds up getting killed in the robbery. His car's missing. They finally found the car in Louisiana. Unfortunately, when it was recovered, the deputy that recovered transposed a couple of numbers on the vehicle identification number. So until such time as it was sold at auction at the scrapyard and storage yard, we didn't know it had been recovered. And of course, everybody that worked there had gone through it looking for valuables, so the fingerprints were all over it. But from the grease monkeys that were there, we had information that a certain, he was half black and half Vietnamese, but didn't speak English, was involved in the case, and had been seen driving a car similar, but that's all we had. Well, asked him down there, and that parish, I said, can you check this guy for any warrants or criminal history? And he said, he came back and he goes, we got a hitchhiking ticket on him. I said, well, I guess that's enough to arrest him. But he works on a shrimp boat with a bunch of other Vietnamese. He didn't speak English. He said, no, that's no problem. We'll send the Coast Guard after him. And they did. And he said, what do you want to talk to him? I said, well, we can be there tomorrow, but we've got to have him in custody. Don't worry about that. He said, everything's illegal in Louisiana, son. You got, I owe you a beer. He said, you darn right you do. So it's the way it works. And he was in the parish prison when we got there. I took a Vietnamese speaking officer with him. And that was, that's just the way it worked. And we were able to flip him and clear the case, but it, like I said, he didn't speak a word of English, and we started rattling him off to him in Vietnamese. He flipped right quick. And he recorded the whole conversation in the back seat of the car on a recorder. He introduced me to the court. It flipped. But there's a bunch of strange cases. I mean, I worked with a partner. I used to tell Alfred that, as long as the Oscar Arafat was alive, he would go on. He wouldn't be the ugliest man in the world. But when I saw that Yasser Arafat died, I called Alfred up and said, guess what? I mean, Alfred had a flat top. His ears stuck straight out. His lowest chin sat on the bottom of his tie. He was just a handsome devil. Lower lip hung out like it had half a pound opening in it, even when it didn't. But, like I say, and he wound up, he had an old copy machine. I mean, it rattled and banged and one thing and another. And he's over there writing on something. The crooks over there saying, I'll take the polygraph. Okay, fine. Alfred wrote down, you lied on a piece of paper, stuck it on the copy machine, and said, come over here, lay your hand on top of this. Push the button. Did you kill so-and-so? You know. It spits out the deal and says, you lied. That's right.
It's
worked out, and we never told the DA's office about it.
What's your favorite book that you read?
You know, I don't know. Remember the Branch Davidian compound that got burned down and 80 people killed? I told the truth about this one. I had friends that had been on Houston PD at the time. And we went to work, we highly political and had a mayor that hated the cops. And, I mean, they gave us a pay raise. I don't know, it wasn't much, you know, X number of %. And then she took the pay raise back, and she took it out of the whole thing. So we wound up losing money. And she didn't care for us a lot. That's okay, it's her business. Last I heard of her, she was living with a registered sex offender in a trailer house. Strange woman. Yeah. But, you know, the favorite, that one, at that time, those guys went to work for ATF, and when they had the Branch Davidian massacre, they went in and surrounded it. They were running agents in and out. Every week they'd change them out. And I talked to one down there on the cell phone, and he said, man, you won't believe what they're doing, and I'm not going to say it on the cell phone. But, and then he rotated back into Houston, and he told me, he goes, they had special forces people in there. He said, I don't know what they were. He said, the BDUs, the uniforms they had on had no names, and the patches on their sleeves at all. And he goes, they're showing that, he said, they got new gifts that they get from different agencies they try out. And he said, FLIR, the front-looking heat-seeking sources you see on scopes, they had those from rifle scopes. They were new, brand new, they were tested. So they set it up and they were showing the ATF guys how it worked. They got it down there. He said, you can see jackrabbits and you can see coyotes out there on the compound. And he goes, the guy that's looking at it, yeah, push this button, push that. You know, they give you the distance, how far it is. And this will calibrate the scope to it, where you don't have to adjust, use Kentucky windage. He goes, that's cool. He goes, yeah, there's somebody in a tree there by the compound. He swings it, he said, put it on and push the button, see how far it is. Tells him, said, I push this button, which time it goes off and blows the guy out of the tree. And he told me about this. And then several days later, after they burned everybody to death, I read about this cadaver found under the tree there next to the compound. I can't prove anything. That's what I wrote. There's stuff out there that needs writing.
Are your books also on Kindle?
Pardon me, they're all in e-books, also print and Amazon.
I like to enlarge things. I can see them now.
Yeah, I want something in my hands. But, you know, there was a fellow that I wish I could have gotten into open house. Bernie had been in Rhodesia, and then he went to South Africa and worked there. And when South Africa got too dangerous for his family, he came to the States because he shot competitively with rifle. And he lived in the States. And, but he was telling me stuff, and I'd known him for a couple of years, and he told me, you know, my brother was with Mike Hoare. And I said, in the Congo? And he goes, yeah. I said, under Kashalugu. And he goes, yeah. I said, rough boys, they were used to rough times. And I said, yes, they were. I said, my dad knew Mike Hoare. And Mike Hoare was he was from India. He was British, and he soldiered all over the place after World War II. And if they wanted to hire somebody to run an army, they'd hire him, and he could do it. And he did a year in prison somewhere, or somebody didn't like him, but other than that. And once I said that, he would open up to me a bit. But because I lived in Eritrea, we'd talk about things and laugh about stuff. He said, a friend of his had a poultry operation there. And he said, dogs, anything, nothing would work. He said they had theft problems all the time. And Bernie told him, he said, get hold of the village witch doctor to come out and roll the bones and do some incantations, and the theft stopped for a year. Every year he hired a guy to come back and put a hex on anybody, and you're dealing with the tribesmen are tougher than sin. Most of them have not had any vaccinations. Penicillin is a wonder drug. You wind up somebody hurt terribly, you shoot them with penicillin, and they survive. Whereas most any of us would be dead tomorrow. It's just a fact of life over there. But you can have a witch doctor put a hex on them and they'll die tomorrow too. So,
yeah.
It's a whole different program. Yeah, it's like I was telling my wife, there weren't any toy stores when I was a kid. So my dad would have them made up for us. I had toy hyenas that were out of hyena skin. And she said, no wonder you're strange. But anyway, he had two Colt .45 revolvers that were cast out of aluminum for my brother and holsters made out of it. So they had to take them away from him and his pistol whip on the neighbor kid. Anyway, I guess I confessed enough. But anyway, hopefully y'all enjoyed what I did.
I have one more question. We have a private investigator back here who had her license for a while. Did you ever work with private investigators, and how much?
I married one and made a boy out of it.
Okay. Are you allowed to give them much information? I mean, how much? I don't even know.
She had access to information I couldn't get through her database.
Ah.
So we pimped each other for information on that. But again, most PIs wind up getting information, handing it over to somebody, and they never know what happens, particularly in lawsuits. Because my wife did it for 20-some years, and never testified once. So insurance companies either pay off or they wouldn't. And she was known nationally basically on homicides and suicides. And this is the right, you need to, see if the family will exhume. Some cases where, one case particularly, where even though she was working for the insurance company, she wound up telling the wife of the dead man, he didn't kill himself. It was not autoerotic, and it was a sexual thing to him. You need to get somebody with that information and get the family some money. But, yeah, for the most part, most of you guys don't wind up working on a whole lot of murders. And sometimes they do. She had one woman that she was working her death claim on, and it was her mother. And she was interviewing her mother, taking a statement from her, and the mother was talking about what a sorry dope addict her daughter was. And she said, is that why you killed her? And she said, yes. So, she closed out her stuff and called the Ellis County DA or Sheriff's Department. The guy that was working the case and said, oh, by the way, she just confessed to me that she killed her daughter. But you never know when they're going to break loose with it. It's like the cold cases. you come back and work a COVID case, and sometimes people get religion, some people grow up, some people dry out. Sometimes they're never worth killing, you know, but you never know. And I will tell you one more thing. If you wind up in a switch, you've got somebody that needs some advice regarding a shooting, go ahead and pick up my card, email me. I'm not in charge of anything, but I don't want to see them hung out to dry. And, but tell them if I find out something that is very damning, I'll tell the DA in that county. But, you know, there are people that wind up going to prison. And there's cases that people get charged with murder. There aren't murders that are alleged of homicide. But there are some cases that people don't need to go up on. And there's plenty of enough problem children in this world. And they don't even make work in fields anymore, so that's, that used to be the case. And George Pito, who worked in the prison system, I got to know him back in about 1970, he said, you know, these people have never done anything constructive in their life, and now they can look back and say, that is such a nicely held row of corn. And, you know, and they get out there in the sun and work hard, and they don't want to do that again. And it worked. A lot of times the recidivism rate went down because of it. I've taken up enough for y'all today. Y'all take care. And any firearms related thing, if you don't know anything about guns, go ask Bubba. Bubba will tell you how this gun works, this round works. And everybody knows a Bubba or has a friend that knows him.
How much are your books?
13.
13. Okay. All right. That was wonderful. Now it's time for you to say what you've been doing. Does anybody have a book out, or you're working on one, or some news? We need news. When? When is your poetry book coming out?
I'm working with it this year. This year.
Okay, this year. Okay, all right. Okay.
Well, KK's making me do this, so. Last weekend, my second book, Creation of Marla Adams, which is a murder mystery, it's been out almost a year now. And about 9 months. Anyway, we did a big push, we did a big sale on Amazon with BookBub and author cross promotion and some other things. We got all that together, and we did the Kindle free thing, and it ended up heading on Amazon #1 in the U.S., UK, Canada, and Australia.
All right.